Good morning, cooperative education students. This is Katie Birch. I'm your cooperative education teacher. We are finishing up topic 6 today, where we're looking at the Human Rights Code, learning about what is human rights, how are we protected from discrimination, especially in the employment, according to the employment standards. So just basically, we're looking at what is the Ontario Human Rights Code. Discrimination is another harmful situation that you have the right to be protected from at work. The Ontario Human Rights Code is the legislation that protects you from discrimination in employment. It was first enacted in 1962, so it's been around a long time. Since that time, different grounds for discrimination have been added to this law. So, what is the Human Rights Code? The Human Rights Code is basically the legislation that protects you from discrimination in employment, education, housing, and government services. And discrimination, the meaning for that, is where people are treated differently based on their sex, on their citizenship, on their abilities, on their sexual orientation, on their marital status, on their age, race, or religion. So what we're going to do is instead of you listening to me forever, we're going to watch a little video on what exactly is human rights. Then we're going to look at the Human Rights Code specifically in Ontario. And then we're going to do a little activity where we're going to use the decision-making model, and we're going to look at these scenarios and figure out what could these people do if their rights were violated. So first, let's dive into a video, and then I'll meet you back here, and we will talk about Ontario human rights.
Human rights. What are human rights? Well, human rights are the values which keep society fair, just and equal. They protect children, the elderly, people in care, victims of domestic violence, people with mental health problems, religious groups, teachers, soldiers, and yes, prisoners. They protect all of us. They protect you. Our human rights are protected by law. That means we can do something if our rights are attacked. But not everyone loves human rights. Some want to water them down, even scrap them. Our rights are under threat, so it's time to get educated. Societies used to be controlled by all-powerful rulers who could be horribly unjust. Kings only gave rights to people they liked. Over thousands of years, people fought for equality, and with every hard-won right came new laws that improved how we lived. But in the 20th century, brutal dictators came to power. They ruled by fear, like the kings of the past. Those hard-won rights, they were dismantled on an unimaginable scale. After World War II, the democracies got together and said, never again. They created a simple document setting out the basic rights we all need to live a dignified life. The European Convention puts rights, not rulers, at the heart of our society. Like the right to life, to liberty, to free speech. Then, in 1998, Parliament passed the Human Rights Act, which made our human rights part of UK law. This means public bodies like hospitals and schools must respect our rights, and if they don't, we can go to our local court to enforce them. Now, because of human rights, patients in hospitals must be treated with compassion. Journalists cannot be forced to reveal their sources. Soldiers must be given proper equipment. Gay people have to be treated equally, and the police cannot keep our DNA forever if we're innocent. We have to be treated fairly, at work, at home, in school, anywhere, everywhere. Our human rights are hard-won. They're part of our British heritage. We are proud of them. If we lose them, vulnerable people will pay the biggest price. Know your rights. Celebrate them. Protect them. Share this video if you think human rights matter. Go on. Share it.
Okay, so we learned about the basic human rights from the last video, and there's also a set of, those are also referred to as a set of universal human rights. And even though human rights, the universal human rights, are not law, there are laws in Ontario under a program called the Ontario Human Rights Code, where it's prohibited, which means it is absolutely not allowed that anyone discriminates people based on a protected ground in a protected social area. So those things are listed here. People are protected by age, ancestry, citizenship, their ethnic origin, where they come from, whether they have a disability. They are not to be discriminated against. Their family status, their marital status, their gender identity, Whether they're receiving public assistance, they're not to be discriminated against. Whether they've had a record of offenses, they're not to be discriminated against. They're not to be discriminated against around sex or sexual orientation. So the guide to your rights and responsibilities under the Human Rights Code can be found on this page here. And this guide just gives you an introduction about the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario and how you can protect your rights under that Human Rights Code, the Ontario Human Rights Code. But because, again, you don't want to listen to my voice go on, I actually do have a short video to show you. It's 7 minutes long, and it's also listed underneath classwork that talks about specifically the Ontario Human Rights Code and that it's for everyone, and that the code's goal is basically to prevent discrimination and harassment because of race, sex, disability, age, and another 17 grounds. So let's take a look at that 7-minute video, and then we'll come back and go through the activity we're going to do about it. So let's put it on.
You may have heard that it is generally illegal for employers, landlords, or businesses to discriminate against anyone because of his or her race, sex, or sexual orientation. But those are just 3 of a total of 17 different characteristics that are protected by Ontario's Human Rights Code. The Human Rights Code is a set of laws that protect people in Ontario from discrimination and harassment in 5 areas of life. Those areas are employment, accommodations, such as rental housing, goods, services and facilities, contracts, and memberships in trade and vocational associations. The code prohibits discrimination and harassment on any of the following grounds: race, color, ancestry, place of origin, citizenship, ethnic origin, disability, creed, sex, including sexual harassment and pregnancy, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, family status, marital status, age, receiving public financial assistance in housing cases, or having a criminal record after a person receives a formal pardon. However, not all unfair conduct or unequal treatment is protected under Ontario's Human Rights Code. In order to be protected by the Human Rights Code, the unequal treatment that a person experiences must have happened in at least one of the 5 specific types of situations we mentioned before, and it must be based on one or more of the 17 protected characteristics. There are also some situations where something that appears to be discriminatory is actually perfectly legal. For example, although the Human Rights Code prohibits different treatment based on age, different insurance rates based on age are actually allowed. Another example of an exception to the general rules is in housing situations. The Human Rights Code allows a landlord to refuse to rent to someone based on gender or race if the owner or his or her family also lives on the premises, and the owner or his or her family would be sharing a kitchen or a bathroom with the tenant. However, what happens when a person's human rights are legitimately violated? For example, if your employer makes unwanted sexual advances towards you or uses offensive racial slurs against you, what options are available in these types of situations? If the problem is with an employer, then these incidents can sometimes be handled within the company. Many companies in Ontario have strict human rights policies and human resource departments to address incidents of harassment and discrimination. If you've been harassed or discriminated against in some other situation that is not related to your job, such as at a restaurant or other place of business, then keep in mind that some larger companies have complaints departments who can help resolve your concerns. Many companies do not want to be known for discriminating against any group of persons, and they will typically do their best to resolve the complaint. However, some situations cannot be resolved, either because the victim has been fired from his or her job, or a company refuses to take appropriate action about an incident of discrimination or harassment. In those situations, a person may wish to turn to the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario, or HRTO for short. The HRTO resolves cases about discrimination and harassment that are covered under the Human Rights Code. The HRTO first offers people the opportunity to settle the dispute through mediation, which is a type of negotiation. If the people involved in the case do not agree to mediation, or the mediation does not resolve the dispute, then the HRTO holds a hearing. Decisions are made by people called adjudicators, and these adjudicators are sometimes called vice chairs or members. HRTO adjudicators have experience, knowledge, and training in human rights law and issues. A person who brings his or her case to the HRTO is called an applicant. A person or company who receives a complaint against them by the applicant is called a respondent. If an adjudicator is convinced that the respondent harassed or discriminated against the applicant and there has been an injury to the applicant's dignity, feelings, or self-worth, then the adjudicator can order the respondent to pay money to the applicant. Keep in mind that some cases must go to the Canadian Human Rights Commission instead, and the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario cannot deal with those types of cases. The CHRC deals with cases that are in the federal sector. Some examples of federal organizations are bus and railway companies that travel between provinces, airlines, chartered banks, television and radio stations, telephone companies, and federal government departments or agencies. But if your case does not fall into one of those categories, you can most likely take your case to the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario. So how does the HRTO work? Well, the process starts with a document called an application. There are time limits for making an application to the HRTO. You must file your application within 1 year of when the discrimination happened. If you were discriminated against or harassed more than once, then you must file the application within 1 year of the most recent incident of discrimination. The HRTO can sometimes accept a late application if it is satisfied the deadline was missed in good faith, meaning it was an honest mistake. But the HRTO must also be satisfied that accepting the late application will not be substantially unfair to the respondent. Otherwise, the HRTO will not hear the case after the 1 year deadline. The HRTO will provide a copy of the application to the respondent after it is satisfied that the application has been completed correctly. The respondent must then fill out a court form called a response and then give it to the HRTO. If you've received an application and notice of application directing you to file a response, that means an applicant has claimed that you have discriminated against him or her, and you will have 35 days to file a response to the allegations against you, be given an opportunity to participate further in the process.
Okay, we're going to stop it there. That gives you a general overview over the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario. And remember that if it falls under this category, let me see if I can find it back in the video. If it's a federal complaint against human rights, then you reach out to the Canadian Human Rights Commission. And that would include most organizations on reserve because most of them are federally funded organizations or government organizations. So if you're not sure, you can always check out the websites to get further information. And that would be the Canadian Human Rights Commission or the Ontario Human Rights Commission. All right, let's jump back in. So now what we're going to do is, so anyone who believes that he or she has been a victim of human rights can file a claim with either the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario or the Canadian Human Rights Commission. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at a few scenarios and we're going to use a decision-making model together. And then you're going to choose one of these scenarios and go through the decision-making model as well. So I find this is a really good model. It's called the ideal decision-making model. And I'm going to show you a picture of what that looks like. If I can get my screen to cooperate with me. Here it is here. Okay, so this is what the ideal decision-making model looks like. Number one, you identify the problem. So let's go take a look. We're going to work through this together, the decision-making model. We're going to look at this first scenario here. Let me just close this down. Okay, so the first scenario is Ronald. Let's work through this one together. Ronald is working as an apprentice in a hair salon. He's enjoying his work, but one of his coworkers keeps saying, "That's so gay," to everything Ronald is starting to feel, to everything. And Ronald is starting to feel that's an attack on his sexuality. What should Ronald do? So what you're going to do is you're going to get the decision-making model that I have given you in the Google Classroom. You're going to go back to Google Classroom, and there's an assignment called the Ideal Decision-Making Assignment, okay? And let me go and add it because we're going to work on it together. Let's see if that's the right one. Oh, for some reason, I can't find it. Oh, here it is. Okay, the template's going to look like this. It's called the decision-making model. And you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a picture of that model right on the top of that document for you. So let's go grab it. And we're going to put it right on top of that document for you so you know exactly what to do and what steps to follow while you're working on this assignment. So you're going to take a look at that decision-making model, and we're going to identify the problem. So the problem with Ronald is that Ronald is feeling like his sexuality is being attacked by at work because people refer to people are saying that's so gay. Okay, so one of his coworkers is making him feel uncomfortable and keeps saying that's so gay. So describe how you might solve this problem. So what are some things that you could do to solve this problem? So I is identifying the problem. D is describing how you might solve this problem. So if this is an apprenticeship or a hair salon, then this person should have a supervisor. Okay. And they could go to the supervisor and state he or she is uncomfortable. Another thing you could do is you could speak to your coworker and let them know it makes you feel uncomfortable. Okay. And then another thing you could do is you could ignore it and pretend it didn't happen. Okay, let's just go with those 3 things. Okay, so you give yourself some options, describe how you might solve this problem, and in this case, you might even also want to refer to the Human Rights Code. So let's go take a look at the Ontario Human Rights Code and see if there's any information in there that can help us solve the problem as well. Oops, doesn't like me today. And all these links will be in your assignment there for you as well. So don't panic if you don't see it. There we go. Ontario Human Rights Code. Okay. There we go. Okay. Let's see if it tells guide to your rights and responsibilities under the Human Rights Code. So let's open up the poster and see if that helps us. All right. Let's go to sexual harassment and see if that gives us some information. Okay. Harassment means comments or actions that are unwelcome, should be known to be unwelcome. You have the right to be free from this humiliating behavior. Okay. Let's see if the Human Rights Code will actually give us some information on what to do for exercising your rights around harassment. So you're just going to take a look through this. Yeah, it really doesn't give you a whole lot of information in this document. So let's just go back to our scenario. And we're going to go to the next step. So we identified the problem, which is his coworkers are making him feel uncomfortable because they're saying that's so gay. We described how we might solve the problem. We might go to the supervisor to state he or she is uncomfortable. Might speak to the coworker directly and let them know how they make you feel. or we could ignore the situation and pretend it didn't happen. So we're going to evaluate the possible solutions. So we're going to say, if we spoke to the supervisor, what might happen? What's the scenario that might happen? So the supervisor may support. The supervisor has a duty to to raise this concern to staff. Okay, if you speak to the coworker directly. So the problem when you go with a supervisor is the positive thing is a supervisor has a duty to raise his concern with staff, but the negative is it could make the situation worse. And okay, so another thing that you could do, like we mentioned before, was speaking to the coworker. So the positive about speaking with a coworker is you spoke directly to them and dealt with the situation face to face. Okay. The negative is maybe the coworker will keep harassing or make fun of you. Okay. And then the third thing is to ignore it. And maybe the positive of ignoring is maybe the coworker will stop. But the negative is maybe the bullying will continue. Okay, so now that you've described how you might solve the problem, now you're going to evaluate the possible solutions, which is just what we did. So we identified the problem, we described how we might solve the problem in as many ways as we can think of. Then we're going to evaluate how those possible solutions can occur. And then A is almost like the last step to action, which is act on one of the solutions. So in this case, maybe we would say, okay, I think the best thing to do, but the best thing to do is ask the coworker to stop and that the comments make me feel uncomfortable. If that does not solve the problem, then go to the supervisor as a second step. Ignoring doesn't help anyone solve the problem, and dealing with this now might help someone else. Okay? And then I guess in this case, you wouldn't answer L, because once you've made that decision, you're going to reflect on what happened. How will you change the results? Change or reflect on how you were able to handle this situation. Okay, so that's the ideal decision-making model. We're going to watch another video to show you how to kind of sort through that so you don't have to listen to me all the time. And then your task for this class today, and we're already at 24 minutes, is you're going to go through these next two scenarios, and you're going to use the ideal decision-making model to try and come up with a way to get at least to the action. So you're going to identify the problem, you're going to describe how you might solve it, you're going to evaluate the solutions, so come up with some ways to solve that problem, and then you're going to act. And obviously, you're not going to get to the point where you learn from the choices, because you're not actually going to act on them, because we're just looking at scenarios. But it will give you an idea of how to sort of sort through a decision-making model. So let's watch a quick video, and then I'm going to give you the rest of this class to do the ideal decision-making model. And that is your task for today's class around human rights and the Human Rights Code of Ontario. So let's go take a look at that video. Just a second. We're on topic 6. Oh, I lost it. Let me just go find. Oh, there it is. I knew I had it. Okay, ideal problem solving technique. It's a 7-minute video. We're going to watch it and then we're going to end the class and you're going to go and do that assignment in Google Classroom, and I will post that video in here too. Any links that you need for information can be found under topic 6. And then I will post the ideal decision-making assignment, and it'll be due at the end of the week. So, sorry, it'll be due at the end of the week. Yeah. And then we're going to move on to unions and bargaining tomorrow. And then, yeah, we're really rocking through this coursework. This is awesome. Okay, let's listen to the video.
In this brief presentation, I'd like to talk to you about a problem-solving technique called IDEAL. First, we might ask ourselves, what is a problem? Well, a problem exists when there is a discrepancy between an initial state and a goal state, and there is no ready-made solution for the problem solver. So what you might think about, as you would with any problem, there's somewhere that you're at, and there's some goal that you want to reach, but there's not an obvious way to get to the goal. So this is what we're defining as a problem. And in this course and for this presentation, we're concerned with what we call non-routine problems. And these are defined as problems that are novel and need new thinking. So some examples of problems are, what is 2 times 2? Or design a device to stop grease from popping on a cook when frying bacon. Clearly, most of us would know the answer to 2 times 2, and that's just something that we will recall. This is referred to as a routine problem. It takes no new thinking. But to design a device to stop grease from popping on a cook when frying bacon has many different aspects to that problem. There are many different approaches we might want to take. And so this is what we would call a non-routine problem. And these are exactly the types of problems that we're interested in this course. So some other examples of non-routine problems would be something like, what day follows the day before yesterday if 2 days from now will be Sunday? Or a friend asks you to join their firm. She receives half of the profits from a silent partner that owns the firm. If your friend offers you 2/3 of her compensation, what is your take? In both cases, these are problems that we're trying to solve. There's no obvious answer to these problems, and we're going to have to sit down and think about some ways to approach getting to our solution. Now, often when we're confronted with these non-routine problems, there's some psychological things that come into play that we want to make sure that we avoid, and we can avoid them by understanding that we're going to be attacked by these problems. So avoid mental escape, daydreaming and not focusing on the task. This is normally the first thing that we do when we start to have trouble with not being able to come up with a ready-made solution to problems. And then often we literally walk away from the task. And this is where you might be saying things to yourself like, I don't really know how to do this. This is not natural for me. And even sometimes we convince ourselves that we're not really interested in a particular problem. So again, we want to talk about our problem-solving technique, IDEAL. And IDEAL is an acronym, and the acronym stands for Identify Problems and Opportunities, Define Goals, Explore Possible Strategies for Solving the Problem, Anticipate Outcomes and then Act, and then finally, look back and learn from what you've done. So let's look at each of these aspects individually and look at some examples. So first, we like to identify problems and opportunities. In most cases, when we're doing problems in a classroom setting, we don't get the opportunity to do this, but we want to start thinking about how we can look at the world around us and actually identify problems and opportunities, things that need to be solved, and start thinking about solutions to those problems. This example actually comes from that exactly. Someone actually was concerned about being popped with hot bacon grease while cooking bacon on a stovetop. So you might want to develop a method for reducing grease splatters when frying bacon. Or for you all, you might want to obtain an A in your math course this semester. So once you've identified the problem, the opportunities, then you want to define goals. You want to come up with some specific goals that need to be achieved so that you can actually attain the solution to your problem. So again, let's look at our example. We want to develop a method for reducing grease splatters when frying bacon. So the first thing we might want to do is we might say as a goal, we'll reduce the heat. Or as a goal, we'll use a long sleeve heat retardant glove. Now tomorrow in your groups, you'll have an opportunity to work on this, and I want you to come up with a set of goals that will support getting an A in your math course. After we develop goals, it's time to explore strategies. So we have some goals. What are some strategies that we might employ that will actually help us achieve these goals that are going to get to the solution to our problem? So again, we have our example of the bacon grease splatters. We know we want to reduce the heat, and we're going to use a long sleeve heat retardant glove. So what are some things we might do to reduce the heat? Well, we could move the pan away from the actual heat source, because in some cases you cannot change the source of heat. It might be over an open flame, for example. Or we literally might turn the heat down on the stove, which then would reduce splatters. And in our second case, we could use some sort of glove on our hand that goes up our arm to kind of reduce the splatters. So again, tomorrow in class, I'll have you think about some strategies that you can employ to help you attain the goal of getting an A in your math class. So now we get to the anticipate and act. So what can we anticipate or observe and then act upon? This is what we want to do. So we've got a set of goals. We've come up with some strategies. Now we want to start to anticipate the outcomes from our strategies and then think about how we're going to act on those outcomes so we actually get to our solution. So as mentioned before, here we are with our bacon. We reduce the heat, turn down the heat, or increase the distance to the flames we talked about doing. And then we'll use a long sleeve heat retardant glove, which reduces the amount of hot grease hitting exposed skin. So we could do those things, but then think about what might be some of the impacts of that. So if you turn the heat down or move the pan away from the heat source, how does that impact the way your bacon is being cooked? That might be an issue that you want to address. Or reduce the amount of hot grease hitting your exposed skin still might not take care of the problem of now you have grease all over your stove top. So there are lots of things that might come up that you didn't think about as you came up with your goal, and then you came up with a strategy that you were going to employ that might be needing some sort of solutions as well. So of course, tomorrow you'll have the opportunity to do this for attaining your A in your math class. And then the final step is to look back and learn. So as I just mentioned, you would look at the circumstance and say, well, we reduced the heat, but now our bacon's not crispy. So how are we going to adjust our strategy so that we get the crispy bacon that we want, but we don't end up with the hot grease splatters? And of course,
Okay, we're going to stop it there. So you sort of get the idea. I really like how they use bacon, cooking bacon as a problem and taking that through the ideal decision-making model. So your task now is to go into Google Classroom, and you're going to go to the ideal decision-making assignment and work on that assignment. And that's your task for today. And then we're going to move on to unions and bargaining next class. And that's it for me. Have a super day. And yeah, looking forward to seeing your assignments.